The physician's hand was still warm when Elara realized it had been inside her wine glass. She stood frozen in the corridor, rain hammering the windows of Asheford Manor, watching Dr. Merrick retreat down the hall with that same careful smile he always wore. Her cup sat on the silver tray where she'd left it moments before. Untouched, she'd thought. But the angle was wrong. The condensation disturbed. Her heart kicked against her ribs. 6 weeks ago, she'd married a duke to escape one trap. Now she understood she'd walked straight into another. The first duchess had died at these cliffs. The servants whispered madness, but Elara had found the letters, frantic, coherent, terrified. Not mad, poisoned. And she'd just told Dr. Merrick she knew. The wind outside screamed. Somewhere below, the sea clawed at the rocks. Elara looked at the wine, then at the locked door at the end of the hall where her husband spent his nights, drowning in guilt for a crime he didn't commit. She had perhaps an hour before the powder took hold. Before you go, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The rain started the morning they buried her father, and Elara Vance decided it would never stop. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. She stood at the grave with her hands folded, the black silk of her mourning dress already soaked through, and watched them lower the pine box into the mud. Cheap wood. They hadn't even bothered with oak. Her father had died owing more than he'd owned, and his creditors had made sure everyone knew it. Reverend Hale spoke words she didn't hear. Beside her, her cousin Beatrice dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, performing grief the way she performed everything, with just enough effort to be seen doing it. Elara felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. She felt the rain. She felt the cold. She felt the stares of the 7 people who'd bothered to come, most of them there to confirm he was actually dead so they could start circling the estate. What she didn't feel was surprise. Her father had been dying for years, slowly, expensively, in a haze of medicines that stopped working and doctors who stopped coming when the bills went unpaid. The final stroke had been almost kind. Quick. He'd gone to bed complaining of a headache and simply hadn't woken up. The shock came 3 hours later. "It's all arranged," Beatrice said. They were back at the house. Vance Hall, though it barely deserved the name anymore. Most of the furniture had been sold. The curtains were thin enough to see through. Elara stood in the drawing room that had once hosted musicians and now hosted shadows, still in her wet dress because there was no fire to dry by and no maid to help her change. Beatrice sat perched on the one remaining settee, perfectly dry somehow, her mourning clothes crisp and proper. "What's arranged?" Elara asked. "Your future." Beatrice smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "Uncle Edmund didn't leave a will, of course. The estate passes to male relations. That would be my father. And as your legal guardian now, he's made a very prudent match for you." The room tilted. "A match? Lord Harwick, you'll be married within the month." Elara's hands went numb. "Harwick is 70. 68, Miss Beatrice corrected, and quite wealthy. He's buried 3 wives already, so he knows how to treat a woman of quality. You should be grateful. It's far better than you deserve, considering your father left you nothing but debts and scandal." The numbness spread up her arms. "I'm 23 years old. Which is why father moved quickly. Another year and you'd be unmarriageable entirely." Beatrice stood, smoothing her skirts. "The banns will be read this Sunday. Harwick wants a quiet ceremony. No fuss. He's sending a carriage for you next week." "I haven't agreed to anything." "You don't have to." Beatrice's smile sharpened. "You're not your father's daughter anymore, Elara. You're his ward. His property, if we're being honest. And he's decided you'll be much less trouble as someone else's problem." She left. Elara stood alone in the empty drawing room and understood, with perfect clarity, that she had just been sold. PM. The next 3 days passed in a blur of panic and calculation. She went through her father's papers first, desperate, stupid hope that maybe he'd hidden something, some asset they'd missed. But there was nothing, just bills, letters from creditors. A final note from his physician reporting that the laudanum had stopped helping and suggesting a sanatorium they both knew he couldn't afford. On the second day, she tried to run. She made it as far as the village before reality caught up with her. She had no money, no references, no skills that anyone would pay for. The innkeeper's wife took one look at her fine dress and city manners and quoted a price for a room that would drain her last few coins in 2 nights. Elara walked back to Vance Hall in the rain and faced the truth. She had nothing. She was nothing. Under the law, she was barely a person, just a piece of property being transferred from one man's household to another's, Lord Harwick's household. She'd met him once, years ago, at someone's wedding. He'd been old even then, with hands that shook and breath that wheezed. She remembered him staring at the young bride with an expression that had made her skin crawl. That bride had died in childbirth 8 months later. So had the one before her. Elara lay awake on the 3rd night, staring at the ceiling of her childhood bedroom, and made a decision. If she was going to be sold, she'd at least choose her buyer. The next morning, she took the last of her mother's jewelry, a pearl necklace she'd been saving for some impossible future, and pawned it in the village. It gave her enough for coach fare and 3 nights in London if she was careful. She wasn't running away. She was running toward the one piece of gossip she'd heard that sounded like possibility instead of doom. Rowan Asheford, Duke of Thornfield, was looking for a wife. Not courting, not romancing. Looking. The way a man looks for a business partner or a decent horse. The rumors said he'd placed inquiries with 3 different matchmakers, specifying his requirements with the cold precision of someone buying property. Must be of gentle birth. Must be healthy. Must be willing to live year-round at his coastal estate in Cornwall. Must ask no questions about his first wife. The last part was what had made the gossip interesting. The first duchess had died 5 years ago, thrown from the cliffs during a storm, they said. Suicide, probably. She'd always been fragile. Strange. The Duke had closed himself off after that, dismissed most of his staff, and hadn't been seen in London since. Now, apparently, he wanted a replacement. Most women with sense had declined the matchmaker's inquiries. Who wanted to marry a man wrapped in that much darkness? A recluse who lived in a crumbling manor on the edge of nowhere, haunted by his first wife's ghost? But Elara didn't need sense. She needed escape. And she was willing to bet that a man who'd scared off every suitable candidate would be desperate enough to overlook the fact that she came with nothing but debts and damaged reputation. It took her 2 days to track down his London solicitor. Mr. Percival's office was tucked into a narrow building off Fleet Street, the kind of place where old money went to die quietly. Elara climbed 3 flights of stairs that smelled like mildew and yesterday's tobacco, clutching her reticule with both hands. The clerk at the front desk looked her over with naked skepticism. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I need to see Mr. Percival about the Duke of Thornfield's situation." The clerk's eyebrows rose. "The Duke is not accepting social calls." "This isn't a social call. It's a business proposition." Something in her voice must have cut through because the clerk disappeared into the back office. 5 minutes later, she was ushered into a room lined with legal books and suspicion. Mr. Percival was 60, gray, and profoundly unimpressed. "You have 2 minutes," he said, not inviting her to sit. Elara stayed standing. She'd practiced this on the coach. She had one chance. "I understand the Duke of Thornfield is seeking a wife. I'm here to offer myself as a candidate." Percival's expression didn't change. "The Duke's requirements are quite specific. I meet them. I'm of gentle birth. My father was Edward Vance of Sussex. I'm healthy. And I'm willing to live in Cornwall permanently." "Miss Vance?" Percival's tone suggested he already knew everything worth knowing about her. "Your father died in significant debt. You have no dowry, no connections, and unless I'm mistaken, you're currently intended for Lord Harwick." Her stomach dropped. Of course he knew. Men like Percival made it their business to know. "That arrangement isn't finalized," she said. "It will be, in approximately 5 days." He folded his hands on the desk. Even if the Duke were inclined toward charity, which he is not, he would never interfere with another nobleman's claim. "You're wasting both our time." Elara felt the walls closing in. The room was too small, the air too thin. What if I could be free of that claim before the banns are read? "How?" She didn't have an answer, not a legal one. Percival stood. "I thought not. Good day, Miss Vance." "I'll sign anything." He paused. I'll waive every right, Elara continued, words tumbling out faster now. No claim to his property, no expectation of affection or companionship. I'll live wherever he wants, see him as little as he prefers. I won't ask questions. I won't make demands. I'll be exactly what he's looking for, a wife in name only, who stays out of his way and causes no trouble. And in exchange? A name, protection, freedom from being Lord Harwick's fourth wife. Percival studied her for a long moment. You're offering to marry a man you've never met, live in isolation in a house with a rather dark history, and ask for nothing in return except escape from a different marriage. Yes. That's either remarkably brave or remarkably stupid. Probably both, Elara said. But I'm here, and according to gossip, he's turned down 12 candidates in 6 months. So either his requirements are impossible, or he's looking for someone desperate enough not to care what they're walking into. Something almost like respect flickered across Percival's face. Wait here, he said. He was gone for 20 minutes. Elara sat in the hard-backed chair and watched the clock tick and tried not to think about what happened if this didn't work. The coins in her reticule would last 2 more days. After that, she'd have to go back. Let them put her in the coach to Harwick's estate. Let him... She shut down the thought. The door opened. The Duke will see you, Percival said. Tomorrow, 4 o'clock. Asheford Manor, Cornwall. Elara's heart lurched. Tomorrow. He's returned to London on other business. He'll meet you there briefly before returning to Cornwall. If he finds you suitable, arrangements can be made quickly. Percival handed her a card with an address. I'll be frank, Miss Vance. The Duke is not a romantic man. He will not court you. He will assess you the way he might assess a piece of furniture, for function and durability. If that troubles you, leave now. It doesn't. Then be on time. He despises lateness. Elara took the card with shaking hands. She'd done it. She'd bought herself a chance. Now she just had to convince a grief-stricken reclusive duke that marrying a penniless nobody was somehow in his best interest. Ashford Manor sat behind iron gates in Belgravia, a fortress of white stone that looked like it had been designed to intimidate. Elara arrived at 3:50, her best dress hastily pressed, her hair pinned with hands that wouldn't stay steady. The butler who answered the door looked like he'd been carved from the same stone as the house. Miss Vance? Yes. He stepped aside without warmth. This way. The interior was exactly what she'd expected. Dark wood, darker portraits, the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself because it had been there for centuries. She followed the butler through a hallway lined with ancestors who all seemed to be scowling at her, and tried not to feel like she was walking to her own execution. He left her in a drawing room that was clearly meant to impress. Marble fireplace, silk wallpaper, furniture that probably cost more than her father's entire estate. Elara stood in the center of it and waited. The clock struck 4. The door opened. Rowan Ashford, Duke of Thornfield, walked in, and the first thing Elara noticed was that the rumors had gotten him completely wrong. They'd described a broken man. A ghost. Someone hollowed out by grief. The man in front of her was none of those things. He was tall, perhaps 35, with dark hair going silver at the temples and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. But his eyes were sharp, pale gray, focused, missing nothing. He moved like someone who'd learned to carry weight without showing it. He looked at her the way Percival had described, like furniture. Miss Vance? Your Grace. She curtsied, grateful that at least her governess had drilled that into her before the money ran out. Sit. It wasn't an invitation. Elara sat. Rowan remained standing, hands clasped behind his back. Percival tells me you're fleeing an unwanted engagement. No preamble, no pretense. Yes. To Lord Harwick. Yes. Who is, from what I understand, significantly older and rather notorious for his treatment of wives. Elara's throat tightened. That's correct. And you believe marriage to me would be preferable. I believe marriage to you would be survivable. Something flickered in his expression, surprise, maybe, or dark amusement. Interesting standard, he said. Most women aim higher. Most women have options. He circled around her slowly, studying her like a painting he was considering for purchase. It should have been humiliating, Somehow it just felt honest. You understand what I'm offering, Rowan said, or rather, what I'm not offering. This would be a practical arrangement. I need an heir. You need protection from Harwick. Beyond that, I expect nothing from you except discretion. I understand. My estate is remote. The servants are minimal. You would have freedom within the house, but Cornwall is not London. There are no balls, no society, no entertainment. You would be isolated. I prefer isolation to the alternative. The alternative being Harwick. Yes. He stopped in front of her. Why should I believe you won't change your mind? Decide 6 months from now that you want more than a cold arrangement? Demand affection, attention, romance? Elara met his eyes. Because I'm not interested in any of those things. I've seen what affection looks like when it dies. My father loved my mother desperately, and when she passed, it destroyed him. He spent 20 years drowning in grief and laudanum, and it killed him just as surely as it killed her. I don't want that. I don't want something that can break me. For the first time, Rowan's expression shifted, something almost like recognition. You're afraid of love, he said quietly. No. Elara's voice was steady. I just don't trust it to last. The silence stretched between them. Then Rowan nodded once, decisive. Very well. I'll speak to Percival. We can have the contracts drawn by tomorrow and the ceremony performed before your guardian can object. You'll leave for Cornwall immediately after. No wedding breakfast, no announcement. Harwick will be informed once it's done and irreversible. Relief crashed through her so hard she almost gasped. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Miss Vance. You're trading one cage for another. The only difference is that mine has better locks. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Yes? My first wife died at Asheford Manor. The circumstances were tragic. The servants talk. You will hear stories. His voice went cold. Ignore them. Do not ask me about her. Do not dig into matters that are settled. If you can't abide by that, tell me now. Elara thought of the pearl necklace she'd pawned, the coach fare she'd spent, the locked door of Harwick's estate waiting for her if she failed. I can abide by it, she said. Good. He left without another word. Elara sat alone in the drawing room, her hands shaking now that it was over, and realized she'd just agreed to marry a man who'd warned her, clearly, explicitly, that his house was full of ghosts, and she'd better not look too closely at them. But she'd also escaped Lord Harwick, and in that moment, that felt like enough. But they were married 3 days later in a registry office with 2 witnesses pulled from the street. Elara wore a gray dress. Rowan wore the expression of a man fulfilling a contract. The official stumbled over the vows twice, nervous under the Duke's flat stare. When it was done, Rowan signed the register with quick, efficient strokes. The coach leaves in an hour, he said. Percival will see to your things. I don't have things. Just one trunk. Then it should be a short trip. There was no kiss. No ring beyond the plain gold band he'd placed on her finger without ceremony. No congratulations. Elara walked out of the office as the Duchess of Thornfield and felt exactly the same as she had walking in. Numb, untethered, committed to a future she couldn't see. The coach was black, expensive, anonymous. Rowan handed her in without touching her more than necessary, then climbed in across from her. They rode in silence. London gave way to countryside. Countryside gave way to moorland. The light faded. Rain began to fall, again, always, and Elara watched the world blur past the window and tried not to think about what she'd done. She'd married a stranger. She was traveling to a house where a woman had died under mysterious circumstances. She'd signed away every right, every protection, every claim, and she'd done it willingly. Are you afraid? Rowan asked suddenly. Elara turned from the window. His face was half-shadowed, unreadable. Should I be? Most people would be. I was more afraid of Harwick. That's not an answer. Elara considered him. I'm afraid of dying slowly, of being trapped in something that grinds me down year after year until there's nothing left. That's what Harwick would have been. This, she gestured at the space between them. At least this is honest. Honest, Rowan repeated, tasting the word. Is that what you think this is? Isn't it? You needed a wife for practical reasons. I needed an escape. We both got what we wanted. No lies. No pretense. No, he said quietly. No lies. But something in his tone made her wonder if that was itself a lie. The coach rolled on into the dark. Somewhere ahead, the sea waited. And beyond it, Asheford Manor, the house that had swallowed one duchess already. Elara watched her new husband's face and thought about all the questions she'd promised not to ask. About his first wife. About how she died. About the grief that had carved lines into his face and turned his eyes to winter. She'd promised not to dig. But as the rain hammered harder and the coast grew closer, Elara had the sinking feeling that some secrets didn't stay buried, no matter how carefully you avoided looking for them. They'd find her anyway. The cliffs appeared first. Elara saw them through the rain-streaked window as the coach crested the final hill, jagged black teeth cutting into a gray sky, waves exploding against them in bursts of white fury. The sea beyond looked less like water and more like something alive and angry, churning itself into foam. "Welcome to Cornwall," Rowan said, without warmth. The manor emerged from the mist like something out of a fever dream. 3 stories of dark stone, windows narrow as arrow slits, towers that served no purpose except to loom. It crouched at the edge of the cliff, as if daring the ocean to take it. No lights burned in the windows. The coach wheels crunched over gravel as they pulled into a courtyard choked with weeds. A fountain stood at its center, cracked, dry, filled with dead leaves. Elara counted 6 windows on the front facade. 5 had curtains drawn. The 6th was black and empty. The coach stopped. Rowan descended first, then offered his hand. Elara took it. His fingers were cold even through her glove, and stepped down into wind that tried to shove her sideways. The front door opened. A woman stood framed in the doorway, holding a lamp that did almost nothing against the darkness behind her. She was perhaps 50, gray-haired, wearing black from collar to hem. Her face had the kind of hardness that comes from years of not smiling. "Mrs. Halloway," Rowan said, "this is the new Duchess." Mrs. Halloway's gaze raked over Elara like she was livestock. "Your Grace." It took Elara a moment to realize the woman was addressing her. "The West Wing is prepared," Mrs. Halloway continued, speaking to Rowan now. "I've put her in the blue room." "Not the Duchess's suite?" "That hasn't been opened since—" Mrs. Halloway caught herself. It seemed premature. "Fine." Rowan was already moving toward the door. "Have her things sent up. I'll be in the study." He disappeared inside without another word to Elara. She stood in the courtyard, rain soaking through her traveling cloak, and understood that her new husband had just deposited her like a package and walked away. Mrs. Halloway's expression suggested this was exactly what she'd expected. "This way, Your Grace." The interior was worse than the exterior. The entrance hall was cavernous and cold, the kind of cold that lives in stone and never leaves. A staircase curved upward into shadow. Portraits lined the walls, generations of Asheford staring down with varying degrees of disapproval. The air smelled like salt and something else. Mildew, maybe. Or older disappointment. Their footsteps echoed. "The kitchens are below stairs," Mrs. Halloway said, her voice flat, reciting information she clearly didn't care if Elara retained. "Dinner is at 7. The Duke prefers to dine alone, so a tray will be sent to your room. The library is in the east wing, though most of it's been closed off. The drawing room is there." She gestured vaguely, "but it's not heated." "How many servants are there?" Elara asked. 5. Myself, 2 maids, a cook, and a groundskeeper. His Grace dismissed most of the staff years ago. "Why?" Mrs. Halloway's expression could have frozen wine. "That's not my concern, or yours." They climbed 2 flights of stairs. The banister was dusty. Several of the wall sconces held candles that had burned down to stubs and never been replaced. The blue room was at the end of a long corridor that felt somehow darker than the rest of the house. Mrs. Halloway unlocked the door, actually unlocked it, which struck Elara as strange, and stood back. "Your quarters, Your Grace." The room was large, sparsely furnished, and deeply impersonal. A bed with faded blue curtains, a wardrobe, a vanity with a cracked mirror, a single window that looked out onto nothing but rain and rocks and sea. Elara's trunk sat at the foot of the bed, looking absurdly small in all that empty space. Breakfast is at 8, Mrs. Halloway said. Ring if you need anything, though I can't promise anyone will come quickly. We're stretched thin. She paused at the door. A word of advice, Your Grace. The manor is old, the floors creak, the walls are thin. If you hear things at night, footsteps, voices, ignore them. Old houses make noise, that's all it is. And if it's not? Mrs. Halloway's face went carefully blank. Then you're better off pretending it is. She left, pulling the door shut with a click that sounded too much like a cell locking. Elara stood in the center of the blue room and tried to remember why she'd thought this was better than Harwick. Outside, the sea roared. Inside, the silence was worse. She unpacked her trunk slowly, trying to fill the space with activity. It didn't work. She had so little, 2 dresses, a nightgown, a few books, her mother's journal. Everything fit in the wardrobe with room left over for the ghost of a life she'd never have. The window drew her. She stood looking out at the cliffs, barely visible through the rain. Somewhere down there, Rowan's first wife had died. Thrown herself off, they said, or fallen, or been pushed, if you believed the darker rumors. Elara had promised not to ask. But standing in this room that felt like a tomb, she was starting to understand that some promises were harder to keep than others. A knock at the door made her jump. Come in. One of the maids entered, young, maybe 18, carrying a dinner tray. She had the same wary look as Mrs. Halloway, like she was serving something dangerous. Your dinner, Your Grace. Thank you. What's your name? The girl blinked, surprised. Annie, Your Grace. Thank you, Annie. Annie set the tray on the small table by the window, then hesitated. Will you be wanting anything else? Actually, yes. Is there a fire anywhere in this house? I'm freezing. The study has one. His Grace keeps it burning, but the rest… Annie trailed off. Mrs. Halloway says fires are wasteful. I'm the Duchess. Can't I order one? Annie's eyes went wide with something like fear. Best not to cross Mrs. Halloway, Your Grace. She's been here longer than anyone, even longer than the Duke. She runs the house how she sees fit. And the Duke allows that? The Duke doesn't notice much, Your Grace, not since… Annie caught herself, flushing. I shouldn't speak out of turn. Since his first wife died. Annie's face went pale. I shouldn't have said anything. You didn't. But I'd like to know, how did she die? I wasn't here then, Your Grace. I only know what I've heard. Which is? Annie glanced at the door like she expected Mrs. Halloway to materialize. They say she went mad, started seeing things, hearing things. She'd wander the halls at night, talking to people who weren't there. The Duke tried everything, physicians, treatments, but she just got worse. And then one night during a storm, she went to the cliffs and… Annie made a vague gesture. They found her at the bottom the next morning. Elara's skin went cold. Did anyone see her jump? No, Your Grace. She was alone. Then how do they know she jumped? Annie looked miserable. Where else would she have gone? The cliffs are the only thing out there, and she was always drawn to them, even before she got sick. His Grace forbade her from going near them, but she'd slip out anyway, like something was calling her. Or someone was pushing her toward them. The words were out before Elara could stop them. Annie's face went white. I should go. Wait. But Annie was already fleeing, leaving the door open behind her. Elara stood alone with her dinner growing cold and the sudden creeping certainty that she'd just made a terrible mistake. Not in speaking freely, though that was probably unwise too, but in coming here at all. This house wasn't just cold. It was wrong. She could feel it in the way the shadows fell, in the silence that wasn't quite silent, in the weight of all that dark stone pressing down. Something bad had happened here, and she was sleeping in the room where they'd put the last woman who'd asked too many questions. The thought seized her suddenly. Blue room. Mrs. Halloway had called it the Blue Room. Not a duchess's suite, not even a proper guest room. This was a room for someone temporary, someone disposable. Elara moved to the door, testing the handle. It opened easily from the inside, so not locked, technically, but the corridor beyond was dark and empty, and somewhere in this maze of hallways, Rowan was in his study, warming himself by a fire he apparently felt no need to share. She was a wife in name only. A duchess with no authority. A prisoner who'd walked into her own cell. Elara closed the door and leaned against it, her heart racing, and made a decision. If she was going to survive this place, she needed to understand it. The house, the servants, the Duke himself, all of it was hiding something. She could feel the weight of secrets pressing against the walls like water against a dam. Rowan had told her not to dig, but Rowan had also left her alone in a locked wing of a house where the last duchess had gone mad and died. Screw his rules. Elara waited until full dark, until the house settled into whatever passed for sleep in a place like this. Then she took her candle and slipped into the corridor. The manor at night was a different creature. Shadows moved wrong. Floorboards creaked under her feet, and sometimes when she wasn't stepping anywhere. Drafts came from nowhere, snuffing her candle twice before she learned to shield it with her hand. She mapped the west wing first, her room at the end, 3 other bedrooms, all locked, a linen closet, empty except for moth-eaten sheets, and a narrow servant's stair that led down into darkness. She took the main staircase instead. The entrance hall yawned below, moonlight filtering through the high windows. The portraits watched her descend. One of them was a woman, young, dark-haired, wearing a dress 50 years out of fashion. Her eyes followed Elara with painted intensity. She found the library by accident. The door was ajar, lamplight spilling out. Elara paused, listening. No voices, no movement, just the faint crackle of a dying fire. She pushed the door open. The library was the first room she'd seen that didn't feel abandoned. Books lined the walls, floor to ceiling. A massive desk sat by the window. And slumped in a chair by the fireplace, one hand still holding a glass of what smelled like whiskey, was Rowan, asleep. Elara froze. She should leave, back away slowly, return to her room, pretend she'd never left. But something on the desk caught her eye. Papers. Letters. And on top of them, a small leather journal with a name embossed in gold on the cover, Catherine Asheford, the first Duchess. Elara's pulse kicked. She glanced at Rowan, still asleep, his breathing deep and even, then moved toward the desk as quietly as she could. The journal was thin. She opened it to the first page. May 3rd. Today I married Rowan Ashford. He seems kind, if distant. The house is beautiful, though very isolated. I think I shall like it here. The handwriting was delicate, optimistic. Elara flipped ahead. June 12th. The servants are strange. Mrs. Halloway in particular watches me constantly. I asked about hiring a lady's maid from London, and she said it wasn't necessary, that she would attend to my needs herself. It felt less like an offer and more like a warning. Further. August 20th. I've been having the most terrible headaches. Doctor, Merrick has prescribed a tonic, but it only seems to make things worse. I feel foggy all the time, like I'm walking through water. Rowan suggested I rest more, but I sleep 10 hours a day already. How much rest does one need? Elara's hands went cold. September 5th. I think someone has been in my room. Small things moved, my jewelry box open when I'm certain I closed it. I mentioned it to Rowan, but he said I must be mistaken, that I'm overwrought. But I'm not. I'm not imagining things. September 30th. The tonic is poison. I'm sure of it now. I stopped taking it 3 days ago and the fog is clearing. But now I see what's been happening. They've been drugging me, keeping me compliant. But why? What do they gain? October 10th. I tried to leave. Made it to the village. But Dr. Merrick was there, waiting. He brought me back, told Rowan I'd had an episode, that I was hysterical, delusional. Rowan believed him. He always believes him. October 15th. There's something wrong with this house, with all of them. I need to find proof, something concrete. Then maybe Rowan will listen. The entry ended. Elara flipped to the last page. October 24th. I know what they're doing. I found the contracts, the agreements. It's not about me. It's about the heir, or the lack of one. If I die childless, the estate passes to... The rest was torn out, just ragged paper edges where the final pages should have been. You should be in bed. Elara spun. Rowan was awake, watching her with eyes that held no surprise, just resignation. How long have you been awake? She asked. Long enough. He stood, setting the whiskey glass aside with deliberate care. I told you not to dig into matters that were settled. She was murdered. She was ill. She was poisoned. Elara held up the journal. She writes about it here. About the tonic making her sick, about trying to escape. Catherine was unwell long before any tonic. Rowan's voice was flat, dead. She suffered delusions, paranoia. The physicians confirmed it, 3 of them, independently. Or 3 of them lied. Why would they lie? I don't know, but she was trying to find out when she died. Elara flipped to the torn pages. What was she going to expose? What happened to the rest of this? Rowan crossed to her in 3 strides and took the journal from her hands. Not violently, but firmly. This is why I told you not to ask questions, he said quietly. Because you'll find answers that make everything worse. Catherine is dead. Whether she jumped or fell or was pushed by invisible enemies doesn't matter anymore. She's gone. It matters if the same people who killed her are still in this house. No one killed her. Then who tore out those pages? Rowan's jaw tightened. Go back to your room, Elara. Not until you tell me the truth. The truth? Something cracked in his voice. The truth is that I failed her. I saw her deteriorating, and I listened to the wrong people. I let them convince me she was mad when she was terrified. And by the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. She was already at the bottom of those cliffs, and I was here, drowning in guilt. That's the truth. Are you satisfied? The rawness in his voice stopped her cold. You think you failed her, Elara said slowly, but you don't think she was murdered. I think she was driven to despair by her own mind. But what if she wasn't? Then I'm complicit. Rowan's eyes were bleak. Because I didn't protect her. I didn't believe her. And that makes me just as responsible as anyone else. He was telling the truth, or at least what he believed was the truth, but Catherine's journal suggested something darker. Who gains from her death? Elara asked. No one. Someone always gains. Not in this case. The estate was mine. The title was mine. Her death cost me everything and gave me nothing but ghosts. What about an heir? She mentioned something about the estate passing if she died childless. Enough! Rowan's voice went hard. You've been here 6 hours and you're already digging up graves. This is exactly what I warned you about. Catherine went down this path. She saw conspiracies everywhere, suspected everyone, trusted no one. And it destroyed her. Or it got her killed. You want to end up at the bottom of those cliffs too? The words were harsh, desperate. Because that's where this leads. Paranoia, isolation, madness. I'm not mad. Neither was she. At first. Rowan turned away, shoulders rigid. Go to bed, Elara. Lock your door. And for the love of all that's holy, stay away from things that are none of your concern. If I'm in danger, it is my concern. You're only in danger if you make yourself a target. Like Catherine did. He spun back. Catherine was my wife. I loved her, and I watched her slip away piece by piece until there was nothing left but fear and shadows. I won't watch that happen again. I can't. The grief in his voice was real, raw, devastating. Elara felt something shift, not trust exactly, but understanding. He wasn't hiding a murder. He was hiding from guilt. I'll go to my room, she said quietly, but I won't stop asking questions. If someone hurt Catherine, if someone's still here, still dangerous, I need to know. You won't find answers, just more questions, and eventually they'll drive you mad too. Or they'll set me free. Rowan looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression broke. You're not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? Someone afraid. Someone desperate enough to accept anything. I am desperate, but I'm not weak. No, he agreed softly. You're not. The silence stretched between them, not comfortable but not hostile either. Just 2 people standing in the wreckage of other people's choices, trying to figure out where they fit. The physician, Elara said. Dr. Merrick. Is he still here? Rowan's face shuddered. He comes twice a week. He's the only doctor within 20 miles, so I can't exactly dismiss him. Does he live in the house? He has rooms in the village, but he visits often. When is he coming next? Tomorrow. Elara nodded slowly. Then I'd like to meet him. Why? Because Catherine was afraid of him, and I'd like to know why. Rowan's expression shifted, something between warning and resignation. Be careful, Elara. Dr. Merrick is well regarded, well connected. If you accuse him of anything without proof, he'll destroy you, and I won't be able to stop him. I'm not planning to accuse anyone. I'm planning to pay attention. That's what Catherine said. The words hung in the air like smoke. Elara turned toward the door, then paused. One more question. Rowan didn't respond, just waited. Did you love her? Yes. And after she died, did you investigate? Look for evidence? I drowned, Elara, in whiskey and guilt and grief. I didn't look for anything except the bottom of a bottle. His voice was hollow. By the time I surfaced, months had passed. The trail was cold, and everyone had already decided what happened. But you never believed it. I didn't know what to believe. I still don't. Elara met his eyes. Then maybe it's time we found out. She left before he could respond. The walk back to her room felt longer than it should have. The corridor stretched and contracted in the candlelight. Somewhere below, a door slammed. Or maybe it was just the wind. Elara locked her door from the inside and stood with her back against it, her heart hammering. Catherine's journal had confirmed what she'd already suspected. Something was very wrong in this house. But it had also revealed something else. Rowan wasn't the villain. He was a victim too. Trapped by guilt, paralyzed by grief, unable to see clearly through the fog of his own pain. Which meant the real threat was still out there, still in this house, still waiting. Elara moved to the window and looked out at the cliffs, dark shapes against a darker sea. Catherine had died down there, driven to it, if the journal was right. By fear, by poison, by people she should have been able to trust. The tonic, Dr. Merrick, and someone else. Someone with enough to gain from Catherine's death that they'd torn the final pages from her journal. Elara pressed her forehead against the cold glass and made a promise to a dead woman she'd never met. I'll find out what happened to you. And if someone hurt you, I'll make sure they answer for it. The wind howled, and somewhere in the house below, footsteps echoed in an empty hall. Elara didn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed listening to the house breathe, the creak of settling timber, the moan of wind through cracks she couldn't see, the rhythmic crash of waves against rock that sounded too much like someone counting down, and the footsteps. They started around 2 in the morning, slow, deliberate, pacing the corridor outside her room. Back and forth, back and forth. She counted 17 passes before they finally stopped. When she checked the hallway at dawn, it was empty, but there were wet footprints on the floorboards leading to the locked door 3 rooms down. Dr. Merrick arrived at 11. Elara watched from her window as the carriage pulled up. Black, polished, expensive. The man who emerged was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 40, with the kind of neat beard and careful grooming that spoke of vanity disguised as professionalism. He carried a leather medical bag and moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been questioned. Mrs. Halloway met him at the door. They spoke briefly, too far away for Elara to hear, but the housekeeper's posture changed, softened, almost deferential, interesting. Elara dressed quickly in her second-best dress and went downstairs. She found them in the morning room, Rowan seated by the window, Dr. Merrick examining his eyes with a small light, Mrs. Halloway hovering in the doorway like a sentinel. "Good morning," Elara said. All 3 heads turned. Rowan's expression was unreadable. Mrs. Halloway's was hostile, but Dr. Merrick's face lit up with practiced charm. "Your Grace!" He straightened, setting aside his instruments. "What a pleasure! I've been hearing about the Duke's new bride." "From whom?" The smile didn't waver. "News travels fast in small villages, especially news as significant as this." He crossed to her, extending a hand. "Dr. Edmund Merrick. I've been the family physician for nearly 8 years now." Elara shook his hand. His grip was firm, warm, lingering just a fraction too long. Elara Asheford. A beautiful name for a beautiful woman, if I may say so. His eyes traveled over her with the kind of assessment that pretended to be medical but wasn't. "You're looking well. The journey from London wasn't too taxing, I hope." "No more than expected." "Excellent. Though I must say you're quite pale. Perhaps a touch anemic? I could prepare a tonic." "No, thank you." The words came out sharper than she intended. "I don't take tonics." Something flickered in Merrick's eyes. "Of course. Many women are wary of medicine, but I assure you my preparations are perfectly safe. I've been formulating them for years." "I'm sure, but I prefer to avoid medication unless absolutely necessary." A wise philosophy, though in my experience women of delicate constitution often benefit from a little support. He glanced at Rowan. "Isn't that right, Your Grace? We found that the late Duchess responded quite well to regular treatment." Rowan's jaw tightened. "The late Duchess is not a topic for casual conversation." "My apologies, I meant no disrespect." Merrick's tone was smooth, apologetic, completely insincere. "I only mention it because I would hate to see another Duchess suffer needlessly. This house can be difficult, isolated, hard on the nerves. The previous Duchess Asheford struggled terribly with anxiety, insomnia, melancholia, but with proper care we managed her symptoms quite effectively." "Until she died," Elara said. The room went silent. Mrs. Halloway's face turned to stone. Rowan stood abruptly, moving to the window with his back to them all. But Merrick just smiled, a different smile now, colder, more calculated. "Tragically, yes," he said quietly. "Despite our best efforts, some conditions are beyond medicine's reach. The mind is a fragile thing, Your Grace. Once it begins to fracture, the decline can be swift and irreversible." "And you believe Catherine's mind was fractured?" "I know it was. I treated her personally for months, watched her deteriorate from a healthy, vibrant woman into someone who could barely distinguish reality from delusion." "What were her symptoms?" Merrick's eyes narrowed slightly. "Paranoia, primarily. She believed people were plotting against her, that her food was poisoned, her rooms were being searched, that I was trying to harm her. Classic persecution complex, combined with severe headaches, disorientation, memory loss. All symptoms that could be caused by actual poisoning." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Elara," Rowan's voice was low, warning, but Merrick just laughed, a warm, indulgent sound that made Elara's skin crawl. "I see you've been doing some reading," he said. "Catherine made the same accusation toward the end. It's actually quite common in cases of severe paranoia. The patient becomes convinced that their symptoms must have an external cause, that someone is deliberately harming them. But I assure you, Your Grace, every treatment I provided was carefully measured and medically sound." "Then you won't mind if I examine your records?" "I'm afraid patient confidentiality prevents me from sharing medical histories, even with family members." "Even with the current Duchess?" "Especially with the current Duchess, unless you have a specific medical concern you'd like me to address." His smile sharpened. "You mentioned feeling well, but I notice you're quite thin, and there are shadows under your eyes. Are you sleeping poorly, experiencing headaches, any digestive disturbances?" "No." "Any anxiety? Irrational fears?" "Only the rational ones." Merrick's expression flickered, amusement mixed with something darker. "Perhaps we should schedule a proper examination, just to establish a baseline. These old houses can affect people in unexpected ways. The dampness, the isolation, the constant sound of the sea, it all takes a toll. Better to monitor your health closely from the start. I'll let you know if I need medical attention." "Of course, though in my experience by the time patients realize they need help, the damage is already quite advanced." He turned to Rowan. "Your Grace, I've left your usual prescription with Mrs. Halloway. Take it twice daily with meals. It should help with the insomnia." Rowan didn't turn around. "Fine." "Excellent. Then I'll be back Thursday to check on your progress." Merrick collected his bag, nodded to Mrs. Halloway, and offered Elara a small bow. "A pleasure meeting you, Your Grace. I look forward to our future interactions." He left with Mrs. Halloway trailing behind him like a shadow. Elara waited until she heard the front door close before speaking. "He's lying." Rowan finally turned from the window. About what? All of it. The symptoms he described, paranoia, memory loss, disorientation, those are exactly what would happen if someone was being slowly poisoned. And he brushed off Catherine's accusations like they were delusions. But what if they weren't? What if she was right? And what possible reason would Merrick have to poison my wife? I don't know yet. But he's too defensive, too eager to control the narrative. And did you notice how Mrs. Halloway deferred to him? Like he has authority in this house that goes beyond being a physician. Rowan rubbed his face, exhausted. You've been here one day, Elara, one day, and you're already constructing elaborate conspiracies based on nothing but suspicion and a dead woman's journal. The journal that someone tore pages from. Catherine could have torn them herself. She destroyed half her belongings in the final weeks. Ripped curtains, smashed mirrors, burned letters. She was in a state of complete breakdown, where she was terrified and desperate and no one would listen to her. Rowan's composure cracked. I listened. I brought in 3 different physicians. I tried every treatment they suggested. I stayed with her night after night when she was screaming about shadows and poison and people trying to kill her. I did everything I could, and it wasn't enough. She still died. And now you're here, dredging it all up again, and I can't— His voice broke. I can't go through this again. The raw pain in his words stopped Elara cold. She'd been so focused on the mystery that she'd forgotten the man at the center of it was still bleeding. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to understand what happened so it doesn't happen to me. Rowan looked at her, and for the first time she saw real fear in his eyes. What if you're right? He whispered. What if someone did poison her, manipulate her, drive her to those cliffs? What if I let it happen because I was too blind or too stupid or too trusting to see it? Then we find out who and we make sure they can't do it again. And if they're still here, still in this house, then we're already in danger, and pretending otherwise won't protect either of us. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Rowan nodded once, sharp and decisive. What do you need? Information about the estate, the inheritance, who benefits if you die without an heir. Catherine mentioned something in her journal about the estate passing if she died childless. What did she mean? Rowan's expression went dark. My uncle, Gerald Asheford. He's next in line for the title if I die without a legitimate heir, but he's in Scotland, has been for years. He has no connection to Merrick or this house. Are you sure? He's 70 years old and can barely walk. I hardly think he's sneaking around poisoning duchesses. But someone could be acting on his behalf. Someone who stands to gain when he inherits? Like who? Like a physician who might receive a significant payment for ensuring the right outcome. Rowan stared at her. That's insane. Is it? Think about it. If Catherine had lived and given you an heir, Gerald gets nothing. But if she died childless, the succession stays open. And if you remarried someone equally unlikely to produce an heir, someone isolated, controllable, easy to dispose of, then Gerald's claim strengthens. You think Merrick is working for my uncle? I think Merrick is working for someone, and I think we need to find out who before he decides I'm as inconvenient as Catherine was. Rowan moved to the desk, pulled out a key, and unlocked a drawer. He withdrew a thick folder of papers. Estate documents, he said. Inheritance contracts, trust agreements, everything related to succession. If there's something suspicious, it'll be in here. Elara took the folder with hands that wanted to shake. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If you're right, we're about to uncover something that could destroy half the people in this house. Good. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. You're terrifying, you know that? I'm desperate. There's a difference. Not much of one. He left her there with the documents and a warning to lock the door behind her. Elara spread the papers across the desk and started reading. It took 3 hours to find it. Buried in the trust agreements, hidden in legal language so dense she almost missed it, a clause that stipulated if the current duke died without issue, the estate would pass to Gerald Asheford. But Gerald's inheritance was conditional. He had to survive Rowan by at least 3 months to prevent claims of foul play, which meant if something happened to Rowan, Gerald couldn't immediately inherit. But his heir could, and Gerald's sole heir was a nephew named Thomas Asheford, who happened to be Dr. Edmund Merrick's cousin. Elara's blood went cold. She checked the documents again, cross-referencing names and dates. It was all there. Merrick's mother had been at Asheford before marriage. Thomas Asheford stood to inherit a fortune if Rowan died childless. And Merrick had been the attending physician for Catherine during her entire decline. The connections were too perfect to be coincidence. Elara sat back, her mind racing. If Merrick was working to ensure Rowan's line ended, then Catherine had been the first obstacle. She'd needed to die before producing an heir. But her death had to look natural. Suicide, madness, accident, anything that wouldn't raise suspicion. So Merrick had poisoned her slowly. Made her sick, confused, paranoid. Convinced everyone she was losing her mind. And when she'd gotten too close to the truth, when she'd started looking for evidence, he'd pushed her toward the cliffs and let the sea finish the job. Now Elara was in the same position. A new duchess. Young, healthy, capable of bearing children. Another obstacle between Thomas Ashford and a massive fortune, which meant Merrick would be coming for her next. The realization hit her like ice water. She wasn't just investigating a murder. She was the next target. A knock at the door made her jump. "Your Grace, it's Annie. I've brought tea." Elara gathered the documents quickly, shoving them back into the folder. "Come in." Annie entered with a tray, her eyes downcast. "Mrs. Halloway sent this up. She said you'd been working all morning and needed refreshment." The tea service was beautiful. Delicate porcelain, silver spoons, a small plate of biscuits. Elara's stomach clenched. "Set it down there, please." "Thank you, Annie." Annie placed the tray on the side table and turned to go, then hesitated. "Your Grace, are you feeling well?" "Why do you ask?" "It's just, you look pale, and Mrs. Halloway mentioned you might be suffering from headaches. She said Dr. Merrick suggested you might benefit from a tonic. I could fetch it if you'd like." "Who told Mrs. Halloway I had headaches?" I'm not sure, Your Grace. I just heard her telling Cook." Elara's pulse quickened. "I haven't had any headaches, Annie, and I don't want any tonics. Is that clear?" Annie's eyes went wide. "Yes, Your Grace, of course." "Good. And Annie, if anyone asks you to bring me medicine or supplements or anything like that, I want you to tell me first, before you bring it. Understand?" Yes, Your Grace." "Thank you. That will be all." Annie fled. Elara stared at the tea service. Beautiful, thoughtful, potentially lethal. She picked up the teapot, carried it to the window, and poured it out onto the stones below. Then she locked the door and sat with her back against it, trying to slow her racing heart. They were already starting. The same pattern as Catherine. The suggestions of illness, the offers of help. The slow, insidious campaign to make everyone believe she was unwell, fragile, in need of medical intervention. But Elara had one advantage Catherine hadn't had. She knew what to look for, and she wasn't going to take a single thing from Merrick or Mrs. Halloway or anyone else in this house. Not tea, not food, not medicine. Nothing. She'd starve before she'd let them poison her. The thought was both terrifying and clarifying. She was at war now. A silent, hidden war where the weapons were smiles and concern and offers of help. Where the enemy wore the mask of caregivers and the battlefield was her own body. Catherine had fought this war alone and lost. But Elara had something Catherine hadn't. She had Rowan. Maybe. If she could convince him before Merrick convinced him, she was mad. The sun was setting when she finally emerged from the library. She found Rowan in the study, papers spread across his desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "I found it," she said. He looked up, eyes bloodshot. "Found what?" "The connection. Merrick's cousin Thomas inherits if you die without an heir. Gerald's too old to matter, but Thomas is young, ambitious, and apparently quite eager to see his inheritance secured." Rowan set down his glass slowly. "How do you know this?" "Your estate documents, the trust agreements. It's all there if you know where to look." "That doesn't mean Merrick is involved." "Merrick is Thomas's cousin. He's been treating you for years, and he was Catherine's physician when she died." "Elara, they tried to poison me today." That stopped him. "What?" "The tea. Annie brought it up on Mrs. Halloway's orders. Said I looked pale and might need a tonic. The same way it started with Catherine. Rowan stood, his face going pale. Did you drink it? No, I poured it out, but they're already laying groundwork, spreading rumors that I'm unwell, setting up the same pattern they used on Catherine. You don't know that? Yes, I do, because I read her journal, and I'm living her life. The same room, the same isolation, the same helpful physician making the same concerned suggestions. Elara moved closer, urgent. Rowan, they're going to kill me. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but soon, unless we stop them first. We can't just accuse Merrick without proof. Then we get proof. How? Elara took a breath, steadying herself. We make them think it's working, that I'm getting sick, becoming paranoid, showing the same symptoms Catherine did. We let them believe they're succeeding. That's insane. It's the only way. If we confront them now, they'll deny everything. Say I'm hysterical, overwrought, imagining things. But if we play along, let them get confident. Maybe they'll make a mistake, leave evidence, confess to someone. Rowan stared at her like she'd grown a second head. You want to pretend to go mad. I want to give them enough rope to hang themselves. And if something goes wrong, if they move faster than we expect, then you protect me, like you couldn't protect Catherine. The words hung between them, brutal and true. Rowan's face twisted with pain. That's not fair. None of this is fair, but it's the reality we're in. Either we fight back or we let them win. Elara stepped closer. I know you're scared. I know you failed her, and it's eating you alive. But you have a chance to make it right, to finish what she started. Don't waste it. For a long moment, Rowan just looked at her. This woman he barely knew, who'd walked into his nightmare and decided to turn it into a weapon. Then, slowly, he nodded. What do you need me to do? Relief crashed through her. First, tell me about your insomnia medication. The prescription Merrick left today. Have you taken it? Not yet. Don't. Not until we know what's in it. She paused. Actually, do you have any of Catherine's old medications? Anything Merrick prescribed for her? Mrs. Halloway might have kept them. She keeps everything. Can you get them without her knowing? I can try. Why? Because if Merrick was poisoning Catherine, traces might still be in those bottles. Something we could test, analyze, prove. Rowan's eyes sharpened. There's a chemist in the village, retired professor. He might be able to help. Good. Get the medications to him. Quietly. And in the meantime, I'll start showing symptoms. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make Merrick think he's succeeding. This is dangerous, Elara. Everything about this house is dangerous. At least this way we're fighting back. Rowan moved to the window, staring out at the darkening cliffs. Catherine stood right here, the night before she died. She told me she'd figured it out, that she knew who was behind everything, but she wouldn't tell me. Said she needed proof first, wanted to be sure. What happened? I told her to rest, that we'd talk in the morning. I thought she was having another episode. His voice broke. By morning, she was dead, and I never found out what she'd discovered. Elara's chest tightened. Then we'll discover it for her, and we'll make sure whoever did this answers for it. Rowan turned back, and for the first time since she'd met him, something like hope flickered in his eyes. You're either very brave or very foolish. Probably both. Catherine would have liked you. The words hit harder than she'd expected. I wish I could have known her. So do I. They stood in the gathering darkness, two strangers bound by necessity and the ghost of a woman who'd died trying to expose the truth. Outside, the wind picked up, and somewhere below them, in the village, Dr. Merrick was probably already planning his next move. But this time, he wouldn't be moving against someone defenseless. This time, his target was ready. 3 days later, Elara began her performance. It started small, a comment at breakfast about not sleeping well, a hand to her forehead at dinner, mentioning a slight headache. She picked at her food, claiming loss of appetite, let herself look pale and drawn. Mrs. Halloway noticed immediately. Perhaps Her Grace should see Dr. Merrick, the housekeeper suggested to Rowan, loud enough for Elara to hear. I'm fine, Elara said. Just adjusting to the new environment. The previous Duchess said the same thing at first, Mrs. Halloway said, her voice heavy with meaning, before the symptoms worsened. By the fourth day, Annie was bringing up tonics. "From Dr. Merrick," the girl said nervously. "He stopped by this morning, said he'd heard you were unwell and wanted to help." Elara stared at the small brown bottle. "I didn't ask for this." "He said you wouldn't. Said women often resist treatment at first." Annie shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Halloway insisted I bring it. She said it was for your own good." "Leave it there. I'll decide later." The bottle sat on her nightstand like a coiled snake. Elara didn't touch it. Instead, she poured a few drops onto a handkerchief and hid it in her trunk. Evidence for later. On the fifth day, Rowan brought news. "The chemist analyzed Catherine's medications," he said quietly. "They were in the study, door locked, voices low. He found arsenic. Small amounts, but enough to cause the symptoms she described. Headaches, confusion, paranoia. Given regularly over months, it would have destroyed her mind and body." Elara's hands clenched. "Can he testify?" "He's willing, but we need more than old bottles. We need proof Merrick is doing it now. To you." "The tonic Annie brought. I saved some. Can we test it?" "I'll take it to him tomorrow." "Be careful. If Merrick suspects—" "I know." Rowan hesitated. "Elara, if this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, if they move against you before we can stop them, then you make sure everyone knows the truth. You don't let them bury me and call it suicide or madness or anything else. You fight. For Catherine. For me. For every woman they've tried to silence." His jaw tightened. "I won't let it come to that. You might not have a choice." The truth of it sat between them, heavy and cold. That night, Elara woke to footsteps again. But this time, they didn't stop outside her door. This time, the doorknob turned. She'd locked it. She always locked it. But the handle rattled anyway. Testing, searching for weakness. Elara lay frozen, her heart hammering, watching the door in the darkness. The rattling stopped. Silence. Then a voice, soft and oily, seeping through the wood. "Sleep well, Your Grace. Tomorrow we'll discuss your treatment in earnest. I believe you're ready for more intensive care. Dr. Merrick." In the house. At midnight. Trying her door. Elara waited until his footsteps faded before she moved. She dragged the chair across the room and wedged it under the doorknob. Then she checked the window, 3 stories up, nothing but rocks and sea below. No escape. She was trapped. And Merrick knew exactly where she was. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. When it finally did, Elara found Annie in the hallway, white-faced and shaking. "Your Grace," the girl whispered, "I need to tell you something, but you can't let anyone know I spoke to you." "What is it?" Annie glanced around, terrified. "Last night, I heard them. Mrs. Halloway and Dr. Merrick. They were in the housekeeper's room, talking." "About what?" "About you. About how the treatment needed to progress faster. Dr. Merrick said—" Annie's voice cracked. "He said you were stronger than the last one, that it would take more to break you, and Mrs. Halloway said they couldn't wait much longer, that His Grace was getting suspicious." Elara's blood turned to ice. "What else?" "Dr. Merrick laughed. He said not to worry, that he'd handled the first Duchess when she got too close to the truth, and he'd handle you the same way." Annie's eyes filled with tears. "Your Grace, he killed her. He pushed her off those cliffs. And he's planning to do the same to you." The world tilted. Elara gripped the wall for support. "Did he say when?" "Tonight. During the storm. He said storms were perfect, that people would believe you wandered out in confusion and fell. Tonight. Less than 12 hours. Elara's mind raced. They needed to act now. Get to the village, bring back the constable, have Merrick arrested before he could move against her. But even as she thought it, she knew it wouldn't work. Merrick was respected, connected, well-liked. She was a stranger, an outsider, a woman claiming conspiracy without proof. They'd never believe her, unless she had evidence, real, undeniable evidence. "Annie," Elara said urgently, "I need you to do something for me. Something dangerous." The girl's eyes went wide. "Anything, Your Grace." "Find His Grace. Tell him everything you just told me. And tell him we need to move tonight, before Merrick does." Annie nodded and fled. Elara stood in the corridor, her pulse racing, and understood with perfect clarity what she had to do. She couldn't run, couldn't hide, couldn't rely on authorities who would take Merrick's word over hers. She had to make him confess. And there was only one way to do that. She had to go to the cliffs. Tonight, during the storm. And she had to make him think he'd won. The plan formed in her mind, desperate and reckless and probably suicidal. But it was the only chance she had. Because if Merrick was planning to kill her on those cliffs, then that's where she'd meet him. Only this time, she wouldn't be going alone. And this time, someone would be listening. The storm rolled in at dusk, turning the sky black and the sea violent. Elara stood at her window, watching the waves smash against the rocks, and felt the weight of what she was about to do settle over her like a shroud. Rowan had arranged everything. The constable would be hiding nearby with 2 deputies. Rowan himself would be close but out of sight. All she had to do was get Merrick to the cliffs and make him talk. Simple. Except nothing about this was simple. And if it went wrong, she'd be dead before anyone could reach her. A knock at her door. "Your Grace, Dr. Merrick is here to see you. He says it's urgent." Mrs. Halloway's voice, flat, emotionless. Elara took a breath and opened the door. Merrick stood in the hallway, his medical bag in hand, that same pleasant smile on his face. "Your Grace, I heard you were feeling worse. I thought I should check on you personally." "That's very kind, but I was actually planning to take some air, clear my head." His smile never wavered. "In this weather? I don't think that's wise. I like storms. They help me think. Perhaps I could accompany you, make sure you don't lose your footing." "That won't be necessary." "I insist." His tone hardened just slightly. "The cliffs are treacherous in weather like this. You wouldn't want to end up like the last duchess." The threat was unmistakable. Elara met his eyes. "No, I wouldn't." "Then let me help you." He extended his hand. "After all, that's what I'm here for, to help." Elara looked at his hand, the same hand that had probably pushed Catherine to her death. Then she took it. "Lead the way, Doctor." They walked through the house in silence, Mrs. Halloway watching from the shadows as they passed. Outside, the storm hit them like a wall. Rain driving sideways, wind strong enough to steal breath. Lightning split the sky, turning everything white for fractured seconds. Merrick kept his grip on her arm, guiding her, controlling her, leading her toward the cliffs. Elara let him. She let him think she was weak, confused, easy prey, and she prayed Rowan and the constable were already in position, because once they reached the edge, there would be no second chances. They reached the cliffs. The drop was sheer, 100 feet of black rock plunging into churning water. The wind screamed. The rain was needles against exposed skin. Merrick stopped 10 feet from the edge. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he shouted over the storm. "Catherine loved it here. Used to come every day. Even when I warned her it was dangerous." "Did you warn her the night she died?" His smile widened. "Oh, I did more than warn her." "You killed her." "I helped her find peace. She was suffering, you see. Confused, paranoid, convinced everyone was against her. It was kinder to let her go." "Kinder or profitable?" Merrick laughed. "You're smarter than she was, I'll give you that. She never figured out the money part. Just knew something was wrong. But you went straight to the inheritance. Thomas Asheford pays you well, I assume." "Well enough, though the real payment comes after Rowan dies childless and Thomas inherits everything. Then I'll have position, wealth, influence, everything I've earned. By murdering women. By removing obstacles." He stepped closer. "You could have just been a quiet little duchess. Produced no heirs, died peacefully in your sleep someday. But you had to dig, had to ask questions, just like Catherine. And now you're going to push me off these cliffs like you pushed her. Oh no, not push." Merrick reached into his medical bag. "You're going to jump, driven mad by isolation and the tragic history of this house. Poor, unstable duchess, just like the last one." He pulled out a syringe. "This will help. Make it easier. You'll barely feel anything." Elara backed toward the edge. "You'll never get away with this." "I already have. Once." He advanced on her. "And I'll do it again." "Not this time." The voice came from behind him. Merrick spun. Rowan stood 20 feet away, rain-soaked, face carved with fury, and behind him 3 men in constable uniforms, lanterns held high. Merrick's face went white. "We heard everything," Rowan said, his voice deadly quiet. "Every word, and they'll be testifying to it in court." Merrick looked from Rowan to the constables to Elara, still standing at the cliff's edge. His expression shifted, calculation to panic to rage. "You think they'll believe you?" he snarled. "I'm a respected physician. You're a known drunk, and she's a desperate social climber. I'll tell them she lured me here, tried to kill herself, and you're fabricating stories to cover—" "We have Catherine's medications," Elara interrupted, "tested and confirmed to contain arsenic. We have her journal documenting your abuse, and now we have your confession, witnessed by officers of the law." Merrick's hands clenched. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, we can." Rowan stepped forward, pulling something from his coat, a small brown bottle, the tonic Merrick had sent for Elara. "We tested this too," Rowan said. "Same poison, same compound, your signature mixture." The rage on Merrick's face shifted to something darker, cornered. "Arrest him," the head constable said, moving forward. Merrick looked at the approaching officers, at Rowan, at Elara standing at the cliff's edge, and he ran. Not away from the cliffs, toward them, toward Elara. She saw him coming, saw the wild desperation in his eyes, and knew, if he was going down, he was taking her with him. He charged. Elara sidestepped at the last second. Merrick's momentum carried him past her, his hands grasping empty air where she'd been standing. And then there was nothing beneath his feet but storm and gravity and 100 feet of fall. He screamed once. Then the sea swallowed the sound. Elara stood frozen at the edge, staring down at the churning water where Dr. Edmund Merrick had disappeared. Behind her, the constables were shouting, rushing forward. Rowan reached her first, pulling her back from the edge, his arms wrapping around her as her legs finally gave out. "It's over," he said into her hair. "It's over." But Elara couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only shake as the reality crashed over her. She'd almost died. Catherine had died, and the man responsible had just fallen to the same fate he'd intended for both of them. Justice. Terrible, final, absolute justice. The storm raged on. But for the first time since she'd arrived at Asheford Manor, Elara Vance felt something other than fear. She felt like she could breathe. They found Merrick's body 2 days later, wedged between the rocks at low tide. The constables pulled him from the water, bloated and broken, his medical bag still strapped across his chest like he'd been carrying it to the afterlife. Inside were 3 more syringes, 2 bottles of arsenic-laced tonic, and a leather notebook documenting every dose he'd given Catherine over the final 6 months of her life. Evidence. Meticulous, damning, written in his own hand. He kept records, the head constable said, standing in Rowan's study with the waterlogged notebook spread across the desk. Dosages, dates, observed symptoms, like he was conducting an experiment. Elara stared at the pages, at Catherine's suffering reduced to clinical notes, and felt her stomach turn. "Why would he document his own crimes?" Rowan asked, his voice hollow. "Arrogance," the constable said. "Or maybe he thought no one would ever look. Either way, this is enough to close the investigation into the first Duchess's death. The coroner will amend her death certificate, rule it homicide instead of suicide." "And Mrs. Halloway?" Elara asked. The constable's expression darkened. "We're questioning her now. She's claiming ignorance, says she had no idea what Merrick was doing, but the staff is starting to talk. Seems she was more involved than she's letting on. They'd arrested the housekeeper the morning after Merrick's death, dragged her from her rooms while she protested her innocence in a voice that never rose above a monotone. She hadn't cried, hadn't broken, just sat in the constable's wagon with her hands folded, staring at nothing. Annie had been the one to break the silence. The young maid had come forward 2 hours after the arrest, shaking but determined, and told the constables everything. How Mrs. Halloway had ordered her to add powders to Catherine's food, how she'd been threatened with dismissal if she refused, how she'd watched the first Duchess deteriorate and been too afraid to speak up. "I thought if I just kept my head down, it would stop," Annie had whispered, tears streaming. "But it never stopped, and then her grace arrived, and I knew they'd do it again. I couldn't stay silent anymore." Other servants had followed. The cook admitted to following Mrs. Halloway's instructions without question. The groundskeeper confessed he'd been told to lock certain doors, prevent Catherine from leaving the grounds. Piece by piece, the conspiracy unraveled. And at the center of it all was Mrs. Halloway, who still maintained she'd done nothing wrong. Just following the physician's orders, she'd said flatly when questioned. A housekeeper's duty is to ensure the household runs smoothly. Dr. Merrick was treating the Duchess. I assisted. Nothing more. You assisted in murder, the constable had countered. Mrs. Halloway's expression hadn't changed. The first Duchess was ill. Dr. Merrick was attempting to help her. If his treatments failed, that's a matter between him and his conscience. I was simply doing my job. The complete absence of remorse had chilled everyone in the room. Now, standing in the study with Merrick's notebook open between them, Elara understood what Catherine had been up against. Not just one killer, but a network of complicity. People who'd chosen convenience over conscience, obedience over action. Will she hang? Rowan asked quietly. The constable hesitated. Hard to say. She didn't administer the poison directly, didn't push anyone off cliffs. A good barrister might argue she was following medical instructions in good faith, but conspiracy to commit murder? He shook his head. She'll serve time. How much depends on the judge. It wasn't enough. Elara knew it, and from the look on Rowan's face, he knew it too. Mrs. Halloway had enabled Catherine's death, had watched a woman suffer and done nothing, had started the same process with Elara without hesitation, and she might walk away with a few years in prison and her conscience intact. What about Thomas Asheford? Elara asked. Merrick's cousin, the one who stood to inherit. We've sent word to the authorities in his district, but unless we can prove he ordered the murders or paid Merrick directly, he's untouchable. Being related to a criminal isn't a crime itself. Even if he benefited from the crimes? Even then, without evidence of conspiracy, there's nothing we can charge him with. Rowan's hands clenched. So he gets away with it. For now, but we'll be watching him. If he makes a move, tries to contest the estate or cause trouble, we'll be ready. It was cold comfort. The constable gathered the notebook and other evidence, promising to keep them informed of the investigation's progress. When he left, the study fell into heavy silence. Elara moved to the window, looking out at the cliffs where Merrick had fallen. The storm had passed. The sea was almost calm now, sparkling in late morning sun like nothing terrible had ever happened there. She was right, Rowan said behind her. Catherine, about everything. The poison, the conspiracy, Merrick. She knew, and I didn't believe her. You didn't have proof. I didn't look for proof. I just accepted what everyone told me, that she was sick, delusional, beyond help. His voice cracked. I failed her completely. Elara turned. Rowan stood by the desk, his face drawn with a grief that had finally found its proper target. Not vague guilt, but specific, undeniable failure. You couldn't have known, she said. I should have. I was her husband. I should have trusted her over them. They were very convincing. Merrick, especially. He'd have fooled anyone. He didn't fool you. Because I had Catherine's journal, her words, her warnings. Without that, I'd have been just as lost. Rowan shook his head. No, you would have fought anyway. You're not the kind of person who just accepts what they're told. You question, you dig, you refuse to be quiet. He met her eyes. Catherine was like that too. Until they broke her. Until I let them break her. The pain in his voice was visceral. Elara crossed the room and did something she'd never done before. Reached out and took his hand. Then don't let her death be meaningless, she said. We know the truth now. We've exposed the killers. But there's more to do. The house is still full of people who enabled this. The servants who looked the way, the village that gossiped but never investigated, the system that made it so easy to dismiss a woman's fears as hysteria. What are you suggesting? Change. Real change. Starting here. She gestured at the manor around them. This house was a prison. Let's make it something else. Rowan looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language. What did you have in mind? Over the next week, Elara started systematically dismantling the infrastructure of silence that had protected Merrick. First, she dismissed every servant who'd admitted to following Mrs. Halloway's instructions without question. It wasn't about punishment, though she felt little sympathy for people who'd enabled murder, but about establishing that complicity would no longer be tolerated. "But Your Grace," the cook protested when given her notice, "I was just doing what the housekeeper ordered. I didn't know it was wrong." "You didn't ask," Elara corrected. "You saw the first Duchess deteriorating and you didn't question why. You followed orders because it was easier than thinking for yourself. I won't have that in my household." The cook left in tears. Annie stayed. So did the groundskeeper, who'd come forward voluntarily to confess his part. And Elara hired new staff from the village. Women, mostly, who'd known Catherine and mourned her loss. "I want people who'll speak up," she told Rowan when he questioned the hirings. "People who won't just follow orders blindly. If something's wrong in this house, I want to know about it." "You're building a household of rebels. I'm building a household of human beings with functioning consciences. There's a difference." Next, she opened the closed wings of the manor. The Duchess's suite, Catherine's rooms, had been locked since her death. Elara had them aired out, cleaned, and converted into a library. Not Rowan's private collection, but a real library open to anyone in the household who wanted to read. "Education," she told the new staff. "Access to books, to ideas, to information. That's how you prevent people from becoming cogs in someone else's machine." She found Catherine's belongings still stored in trunks, dresses, jewelry, letters, journals. Instead of burning them or hiding them away, Elara cataloged everything carefully, preserved it. "Why?" Rowan asked, watching her work. "Because she existed, because her life mattered, and because someday someone might need to know what happened here. I want the evidence to survive." Among Catherine's things, Elara found letters to friends in London, never sent, drafts of pleas for help that had never been mailed, and a half-finished letter addressed to Rowan himself. "My dearest husband, if you're reading this, I'm likely dead. Please know that I loved you until the end, and I forgive you for not believing me. How could you have known? Dr. Merrick is so convincing, so careful. But please, if nothing else, investigate my death. Look beyond the obvious. Don't let them tell you I was simply mad. There are forces at work in this house that mean you harm. They want you isolated, childless, vulnerable. I tried to protect you, but I failed. Perhaps you'll have better luck. Find someone you can trust, someone strong enough to stand beside you instead of behind you." All my love, Catherine Elara read the letter 3 times, tears blurring her vision before showing it to Rowan. He read it in silence, his face going pale, then carefully folded it and placed it in his desk drawer. "She knew she was going to die," he said quietly, "and she was still trying to protect you. I don't deserve—" "Stop!" Elara's voice was sharp. "You've punished yourself for 5 years. That's enough. Catherine forgave you. Maybe it's time you forgave yourself." "I don't know how." "Start by honoring her memory properly, by making sure what happened to her never happens to anyone else." Rowan looked at her with something between gratitude and despair. "You're very good at this, you know, giving purpose to grief." "I'm just practical. Grief without action is just drowning. I prefer to swim." The village began to change too. News of Merrick's crimes spread fast. Small communities were like that, gossip traveling faster than wildfire. At first there was disbelief. Dr. Merrick had been respected, trusted, well-liked. The idea that he was a murderer seemed impossible, but then the constables released their findings. Merrick's notebook, the arsenic in Catherine's medications, the confession witnessed by multiple officers. The disbelief turned to horror, and then, slowly, to something else. Guilt. Because people had suspected something was wrong. They'd seen Catherine deteriorating. They'd heard the rumors about her madness, and they'd done nothing. "We thought the Duke was handling it," one villager told Elara when she visited the market. "We didn't want to interfere in noble business." "And when she died?" The woman looked away. "We thought it was tragic, sad. But these things happen, don't they? Women go mad sometimes, throw themselves off cliffs. It's terrible, but what can you do?" "You can ask questions," Elara said. "You can demand investigations. You can refuse to accept easy answers when someone dies suspiciously." "That's not our place." "Then whose place is it?" The woman had no answer, but others did. A group of women from the village came to the manor a week after Merrick's death. asking to speak with Elara. She received them in the drawing room, now properly heated and furnished, no longer a tomb. Their spokeswoman was a widow named Mrs. Brennan, perhaps 60, with steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. "Your Grace," she began, "we've come to apologize." Elara blinked. For what? For not speaking up, for not helping the first Duchess when she clearly needed it, for letting that monster operate unchecked in our community. Mrs. Brennan's voice shook. "We failed her, and we nearly failed you too. You didn't know. We suspected, some of us anyway, but we kept quiet because it was easier, because Dr. Merrick was important, and we were nobody, because that's how things have always been done." She straightened. "But that's going to change. We're organizing, forming a women's association. So if anything like this ever happens again, if any woman in this village is being hurt or silenced or controlled, she'll have people she can turn to, people who will believe her and help her." Elara felt something tight in her chest loosen. That's remarkable. It's necessary and long overdue." Mrs. Brennan's expression softened. "The first Duchess tried to get help, came to the village, asked for assistance. But Dr. Merrick was there, telling everyone she was confused, delusional, and we believed him because he was a man and a doctor and she was just a woman having an episode." Her voice hardened. "Never again. If a woman comes to us for help, we'll listen, and we'll act." The other women murmured agreement. Elara looked at them, working women, shopkeepers' wives, farmers' daughters, and saw the beginning of something powerful, something that might actually prevent the next Catherine from dying alone and unheard. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Catherine would have appreciated this." "We should have done it for her while she was alive," Mrs. Brennan said. "But better late than never. And Your Grace, if you ever need anything, anything at all, you send word. We won't fail you the way we failed her." After they left, Elara stood alone in the drawing room and felt, for the first time since arriving at Asheford Manor, like she might actually survive this place. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally. She might actually build a life here. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Thomas Asheford arrived 3 weeks after Merrick's death. He came unannounced, his carriage rolling up to the manor at midday, his expression radiating entitlement and barely concealed fury. Elara was in the garden when he arrived, a space she was slowly reclaiming from years of neglect. She straightened, wiping dirt from her hands, and watched him approach. He was perhaps 30, well-dressed, with the kind of face that probably looked charming when he smiled, but currently looked like he wanted to set something on fire. "You must be the new Duchess," he said without preamble. "Thomas Asheford. I'm here to speak with my cousin." "The Duke is in the study. I'll have someone—" "I know where the study is. This is practically my house, after all." He pushed past her without waiting for permission. Elara followed, irritation sparking. She found him in the study already, standing across from Rowan with his arms crossed. "Absurd accusations," Thomas was saying. "Dr. Merrick was a respected physician. The idea that he was involved in some conspiracy is ludicrous." "He kept a journal documenting his crimes," Rowan said flatly. "The constables have it." "A journal that conveniently appeared after his death? How convenient, and how very suspicious." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "I think someone is trying to frame a dead man to cover up their own incompetence. The first Duchess died on your watch, Rowan. Now you're trying to shift blame onto others. The evidence is circumstantial at best. Arsenic in old bottles? That could be contamination. A confession supposedly given during a storm where no one could hear properly? Hearsay. You've built a case on nothing because you need someone to blame for your failures." Elara stepped into the room. "He tried to kill me too." Thomas turned, looking her up and down with open disdain. "So you claim. But you're still alive, aren't you? Which suggests either you're exaggerating the danger or you're complicit in fabricating this entire narrative. Why would I fabricate anything? To secure your position. To ensure your husband doesn't look too closely at your own motives for this marriage. After all, you came from nothing. Married a duke to escape debts and scandal. Now you're playing the hero to distract from the fact that you're a social climber who got lucky." The words hit like slaps. Rowan stepped forward, his voice dangerous. "Get out!" "This house should be mine," Thomas snapped. "By rights, when you die childless, which seems increasingly likely, It passes to my family. The Asheford line continues through me, but you've dragged our name through the mud with these accusations, turned the village against us, made us look like criminals." "You are criminals," Elara said. "Merrick was working for you, ensuring Rowan died without an heir so you could inherit." "Prove it." "We will." Thomas laughed, bitter and sharp. "You're a nobody from nowhere with no proof of anything except your own paranoia. I'm a respected member of the gentry with connections throughout the county. If you continue making these accusations, I'll sue you for slander. I'll make sure everyone knows you're unstable, manipulative, exactly like the first Duchess." His smile was cruel. "And we all know what happened to her." The threat hung in the air. Rowan moved fast enough that Thomas flinched. "You have 10 seconds to leave my house," Rowan said, voice like ice. "And if you ever threaten my wife again, I'll make sure the authorities investigate every aspect of your finances and correspondence. I'm sure they'll find something interesting about payments made to a certain physician over the past few years." Thomas's face went pale. "You're bluffing." "Try me." For a long moment they stared at each other, two men from the same family, on opposite sides of a divide that couldn't be crossed. Then Thomas turned on his heel and left without another word. Elara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "He's right," she said quietly. "We can't prove he paid Merrick. Not without records, correspondence, something concrete." "Then we'll find it." Rowan's jaw was set. "I'll hire investigators. Go through Merrick's belongings, his bank records, everything. If there's a connection, we'll expose it. And if there isn't, then we'll make sure he never gets close to this estate again. Change the succession if we have to." Elara looked at him. "You'd do that?" "I do a lot of things to protect this household now. I've failed once. I won't fail again." The investigators arrived 2 days later. They were thorough, professional, and expensive. They combed through Merrick's house in the village, his office, his financial records. They interviewed colleagues, patients, anyone who might have known about his connection to Thomas Ashford. It took 3 weeks, but they found it. A series of letters hidden in a false bottom of Merrick's desk drawer. Correspondence between him and Thomas, dated over the past 5 years. Discussing Catherine's health, her lack of pregnancy, the need to resolve the succession issue before Rowan could produce an heir, and payments. Regular payments from Thomas to Merrick, increasing in amount over time. The final letter was dated 2 weeks before Elara's arrival. "The new Duchess poses a problem. Young, healthy, fertile. We can't risk another heir complicating matters. Handle it quickly but carefully. Make it look natural. Evidence. Clear, undeniable, damning." The investigators brought it to Rowan first, then to the constables. Thomas Ashford was arrested 3 days later on charges of conspiracy to commit murder. The news spread through the village like wildfire. People who'd defended Thomas, who'd dismissed the accusations as hysteria, suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of history. The village that had mourned Dr. Merrick now burned him in effigy. And women who'd once been silent started speaking up about other instances of men in power abusing that power unchecked. The Women's Association Mrs. Brennan had formed grew from 12 members to 50 in a matter of weeks. Change, slow and grinding but real, was beginning. Elara stood in the garden one afternoon, watching the sea, and felt the weight of the past few months settle into something she could finally carry. Catherine had been avenged, the conspiracy exposed, the killers facing justice. But more than that, the systems that had enabled them were being challenged. People were asking questions, demanding accountability, refusing to accept easy answers. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't complete, but it was a start. "I thought I'd find you here," Rowan's voice. She turned. He stood at the garden entrance, holding 2 cups of tea. Real tea this time, prepared by staff they both trusted. "The investigators are leaving tomorrow," he said, handing her a cup. "They've compiled everything for the trial. The prosecutors are confident Thomas will be convicted." "Good." They also found something else. In Catherine's belongings that Merrick had kept, he pulled a folded paper from his pocket. The missing journal pages, the ones torn out. He'd hidden them, probably planning to destroy them, but never got around to it. Elara's heart clenched. "What do they say?" "Read it," She unfolded the pages carefully, Catherine's handwriting shaky but determined. October 24th. I know what they're doing. I found the contracts, the agreements. It's not about me. It's about the heir, or the lack of one. If I die childless, the estate passes to Gerald, then to Thomas. And Thomas has been paying Merrick to ensure that happens. I have proof now. Letters, bank statements, hidden in the library behind the third shelf, volume 7 of Blackstone's commentaries. I'll take it to the constables tomorrow. Show them everything. Then maybe Rowan will finally believe me. Maybe we can stop this. If I don't make it, if Merrick realizes what I've found, please know I tried. I fought. And I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to win. The words blurred. Elara wiped her eyes, angry at the tears. She had the proof. This whole time, she had it. And she died before she could use it. Rowan's voice was rough. The investigators checked. The evidence is still there. Behind the third shelf, exactly where she said. Letters, bank statements, everything we needed 5 years ago. She died knowing the truth and no one believed her. I know. They stood in silence, the weight of Catherine's final words hanging between them. I'm going to commission a memorial, Rowan said finally, in the village, a monument to Catherine, with the truth engraved on it, what she discovered, what she fought for, how she died trying to expose corruption. The village might object. I don't care. She deserves to be remembered properly, not as a madwoman who threw herself off cliffs, but as someone who saw evil and refused to stay silent, even when it cost her everything. Elara looked at him. This man who'd been drowning in guilt for 5 years and was finally, slowly, finding his way back to the surface. She'd like that, Elara said. I hope so. He paused. There's something else. I spoke with the solicitors about the estate, the succession. And I'm changing the terms, making it so primogeniture no longer applies. Any heir, male or female, can inherit. And if we have no children, the estate doesn't pass to blood relatives. It goes to a charitable trust, one that supports women who've suffered abuse or false imprisonment. Elara stared at him. That's radical. It's necessary. This obsession with male heirs, with keeping wealth and power in certain families, it's what enabled all of this. Thomas wouldn't have had anything to gain if the succession wasn't so rigidly controlled. The other nobles will fight you on this. Let them. I've spent 5 years being controlled by tradition and expectation. It's time to build something different. They stood together in the garden, looking out at the cliffs where Catherine had died and Merrick had fallen. The sea was calm today, almost peaceful. I never expected this, Elara said quietly. Any of this. I came here to escape one trap and walked into another, but somehow... She trailed off, searching for words. Somehow you survived, Rowan finished. More than survived. You exposed a conspiracy, brought killers to justice, and started changing systems that have oppressed women for generations. We did that, both of us. You started it. I just finally woke up enough to help. He looked at her. I know this marriage was supposed to be practical, distant, an arrangement and nothing more. But I want you to know you're not property. You're not an obligation. He struggled for words. You're extraordinary. And I'm grateful you're here. Elara felt something shift in her chest. Not love. It was too soon for that, too complicated. But something like the possibility of it. The foundation that might someday support it. I'm grateful too, she said. For all of it, even the terrible parts. Because it brought us here, to this moment, to actually having a chance at building something real. Rowan held out his hand. Elara took it. And standing in the garden of Asheford Manor, with the ghosts of the past finally at rest and the future stretching uncertain but hopeful before them, they made a silent pact. To honor Catherine's memory, to fight the systems that had killed her, to build a life based on truth instead of tradition, and to never, ever let fear silence them again. The trial started in 6 weeks, but the real work was already beginning. The trial began on a Tuesday in early autumn, when the leaves were just starting to turn and the air carried the first edge of winter. Elara sat in the gallery of the county courthouse, her hands folded in her lap, and watched Thomas Ashford enter in chains. He looked diminished somehow, smaller than he'd seemed at the manor. His expensive clothes couldn't disguise the pallor of his skin or the tremor in his hands. When his eyes swept the courtroom, they skipped over Elara like she didn't exist. Denial, probably, or strategy. Either way, she didn't care. Rowan sat beside her, his jaw tight, his posture rigid. He hadn't slept well in weeks. Every night he'd wake from nightmares about Catherine, drowning, falling, reaching for help that never came. Elara would hear him pacing the halls at 3 a.m, footsteps echoing in the same corridors where his first wife had walked alone and afraid. "Are you ready for this?" she asked quietly. "No," Rowan said. "But it doesn't matter. It's happening anyway." The prosecutor was a sharp-faced woman named Margaret Hale, who'd made her career destroying men who thought themselves untouchable. She'd spent the past 6 weeks building a case so airtight that Thomas's barrister had already tried twice to negotiate a plea. Both times, Rowan had refused. "I want a trial," he'd told Ms. Hale. "I want everything exposed, every letter, every payment, every vile calculation. I want the world to know what they did to Catherine." Ms. Hale had smiled. "Then that's what they'll get." She opened with Catherine's journal. The courtroom fell silent as she read excerpts aloud. Catherine's growing fear, her documented symptoms, her desperate attempts to get help. When Ms. Hale reached the entries about Dr. Merrick's tonic making her sick, several jurors shifted uncomfortably. "The first Duchess of Thornfield was being slowly poisoned," Ms. Hale said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Arsenic, administered in small doses over months, designed to mimic mental illness. And when she got too close to discovering the truth, she was murdered, pushed from the cliffs at Asheford Manor to silence her permanently." Thomas's barrister objected. "Speculation. There's no evidence Dr. Merrick pushed anyone." "There's a witness," Ms. Hale countered. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The witness was brought in, a fisherman named John Brennan, Mrs. Brennan's son, who'd been checking his nets near the cliffs the night Catherine died. "I saw them," he testified, his voice rough with years of keeping quiet. "The Duchess and Dr. Merrick. She was trying to get away from him, but he kept grabbing her arm, pulling her toward the edge. She was screaming. I could hear it over the storm, screaming for help." "And what did you do?" Ms. Hale asked. John's face crumpled with shame. "Nothing. I was afraid. Dr. Merrick was important, and I was nobody. I thought maybe I was seen wrong, or that it wasn't my place to interfere. So I watched. And then she fell, and he stood there for a minute before walking away like nothing had happened." "Why didn't you come forward then?" "Because Dr. Merrick found me the next day. Told me the Duchess had been having episodes, that she'd thrown herself off the cliffs in a fit of madness, and if I said anything different, I'd be calling him a liar. And who would believe me over a physician?" John's voice broke. "I was a coward. I let him threaten me into silence, and she died because of it." The courtroom was dead silent. Even Thomas looked shaken. Ms. Hale introduced the letters next, the correspondence between Thomas and Merrick, laid out in chronological order, showing the progression from vague suggestions to explicit instructions. "The succession issue must be resolved," she read from one letter. "Catherine shows no signs of pregnancy after 3 years. Perhaps nature needs assistance in running its course." From another, "If the Duke remarries, ensure the new Duchess is similarly unproductive. We cannot risk an heir at this stage." And the final, damning letter, "The new Duchess poses a problem. Handle it quickly." "These are not the words of men discussing medical care," Ms. Hale said. "These are the words of conspirators planning murder, 2 murders, and they nearly succeeded in both." She called Elara to the stand next. Elara had been dreading this moment for weeks. Public speaking, being scrutinized, having her every word picked apart by hostile barristers. It all felt like being back in her father's house, powerless and afraid. But she stood anyway. She took the oath with a steady voice and sat in the witness box, looking out at the sea of faces, some curious, some skeptical, some openly hostile. Ms. Hale approached with a gentle expression. "Your Grace, please tell the court what happened when you arrived at Ashford Manor." Elara took a breath and began. She told them about the cold reception, about Mrs. Halloway's immediate attempts to control her movements, her food, her access to information, about finding Catherine's journal and realizing the pattern was repeating. Dr. Merrick brought me a tonic within days of my arrival, she said. Claimed I looked pale and needed support. When I refused, Mrs. Halloway began spreading rumors that I was unwell, suffering from headaches, anxiety, the same symptoms Catherine had shown. And were you unwell? No, I was being set up. They were creating a narrative that would justify future intervention, forced medication, confinement, whatever they needed to prevent me from producing an heir. Thomas's barrister stood for cross-examination. He was older, silver-haired, with the kind of condescension that made Elara's skin crawl. Your Grace, he began, voice dripping with false sympathy. Isn't it true that you married the Duke under somewhat desperate circumstances? I married to escape an unwanted engagement. To Lord Harwick, a wealthy and respected nobleman. To a man who'd buried 3 wives and was looking for a 4th. And you chose instead to marry a reclusive duke with a dead wife and a house full of ghosts. Some might say you traded one difficult situation for another. Some might say I chose survival over a slow death. Scattered laughter in the gallery. The barrister's smile thinned. You've testified that you found the first Duchess's journal, convenient evidence appearing just when you needed it. It wasn't convenient. It was hidden in the Duke's study where Catherine had left it before she died, or where you placed it after writing it yourself. Gasps from the gallery. Rowan half stood in his seat before the bailiff gestured him down. Elara kept her voice level. The journal was authenticated by 3 handwriting experts. The ink and paper were dated to 5 years ago, and the entries match medical records from Dr. Merrick's own files. Unless you're suggesting I traveled back in time to forge evidence, your accusation is absurd. More laughter. The barrister flushed. You claim Dr. Merrick tried to poison you, yet you're sitting here, alive and well. How do you explain that? I didn't drink the tonic. I poured it out and saved a sample, which was tested and found to contain arsenic, the same compound that killed Catherine. Allegedly killed. The coroner's amended report confirms arsenic poisoning as cause of death. You can deny it all you want, but the evidence doesn't lie. The barrister tried several more angles, suggesting Elara was hysterical, attention-seeking, fabricating drama to secure her position. But every attack fell flat against the wall of documentation Ms. Hale had built. When Elara finally stepped down, she felt hollowed out, but strangely triumphant. She'd spoken. She'd been heard. She'd refused to be dismissed. Catherine would have been proud. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Witness after witness took the stand. Servants from the manor, villagers who'd seen Catherine's decline, the chemist who'd tested both old and new medications. The investigators presented bank records showing regular payments from Thomas to Merrick, amounts that increased dramatically after Catherine's death. Thomas's barrister tried to argue legitimate medical fees, but the timeline destroyed that defense. The payments had started before Catherine showed any symptoms, before she'd even met Dr. Merrick. This wasn't treatment. It was premeditation. On the 13th day, Thomas himself took the stand. He denied everything. Claimed the letters were forgeries, the payments were loans, the conspiracy a fiction created by a grief-stricken duke and an opportunistic new wife. I loved my cousin, Thomas said, his voice ringing with false sincerity. I never would have harmed him or his wives. These accusations are monstrous. Ms. Hale approached with a folder. Mr. Ashford, do you recognize this document? Thomas glanced at it. No? It's a contract of sale for a property in London, purchased 3 months after the first Duchess's death for a sum of £50,000. She paused. Where did you get that money, Mr. Ashford? Your own estate records show debts of nearly £30,000 at the time. Thomas's face went pale. I had investments. Which investments? Please be specific. I don't recall. You don't recall investments that generated £50,000? Ms. Hale's voice was sharp. Or is it possible the money came from elsewhere? Perhaps from someone who paid you to ensure certain outcomes at Asheford Manor? Objection! Thomas's barrister shouted. Speculation! But the damage was done. The jury had seen Thomas's face when confronted with evidence he hadn't expected. The panic, the lies crumbling. Ms. Hale entered the property records into evidence. The purchase was made through a shell company traced back to Dr. Edmund Merrick. The same man who was poisoning the Duchess on your behalf. The same man who died trying to murder the current Duchess before she could expose your scheme. Thomas opened his mouth, closed it, looked at his barrister desperately. No help came. No further questions, Ms. Hale said. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Elara spent them in a side room with Rowan, neither speaking, both too tense to sit still. When the bailiff finally called them back, her heart was hammering so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. The courtroom was packed, standing room only. It seemed like the entire county had come to hear the verdict. The foreman stood. We, the jury, find the defendant, Thomas Asheford, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Catherine Asheford, Duchess of Thornfield. The courtroom erupted. Rowan's hand found Elara's, gripping tight enough to hurt. The judge called for order, then turned to Thomas. Do you have anything to say before sentencing? Thomas stood, his face gray. For a moment, Elara thought he might finally confess, show some shred of remorse. Instead, he turned to Rowan. You've destroyed our family's name over a woman who was weak and another who's manipulated you into paranoia. I hope you're satisfied. Even the judge looked disgusted. Thomas Asheford, she said coldly, I sentence you to hang by the neck until dead. May you find in death the justice you denied others in life. Guards led him away, still protesting his innocence, still claiming conspiracy. Elara watched him go and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph. Just exhaustion and the faint, distant hope that maybe Catherine could finally rest. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. As Elara and Rowan emerged, she expected hostility. There were always people who sided with the accused, who believed noble blood couldn't be guilty. Instead, they cheered, women mostly, from the village and beyond. Some holding signs with Catherine's name, others simply clapping, faces fierce with vindication. Mrs. Brennan stood at the front, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she said as Elara passed. Thank you for not giving up, for fighting when the rest of us were too afraid. Elara stopped, throat tight. Catherine fought first. I just finished what she started. Then thank you for honoring her courage, for making sure she didn't die for nothing. The crowd pressed in, women wanting to shake her hand, to thank her, to tell their own stories of being silenced or dismissed or hurt by men who faced no consequences. It was overwhelming, beautiful, terrifying. Rowan guided her gently through the crowd to their carriage. As they pulled away, Elara looked back at the courthouse and understood something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just about Catherine anymore. It was about every woman who'd been called hysterical when she was actually terrified. Every woman who'd been medicated into submission when she tried to speak up. Every woman who'd died suspicious deaths that were ruled suicide or accident because investigating would be inconvenient. Catherine's case had opened a door, and women were starting to walk through it. The changes came slowly at first, then faster. The Women's Association in the village expanded to neighboring towns. Within 6 months, there were 12 chapters across the county, all dedicated to supporting women in crisis and demanding accountability for abuse. Elara helped fund them, but she didn't lead them. That honor went to Mrs. Brennan and others like her, women who'd lived through silence and found their voices. At the Manor, Elara continued opening rooms and changing systems. She converted the East Wing into a school, offering education to girls from the village who couldn't afford tutors. She hired a female physician from London, a radical choice that scandalized the local gentry, but gave women in the area access to medical care they could actually trust. And she worked with Rowan to restructure the estate's governance, creating positions for women in administration and decision-making. You're turning my ancestral home into a revolutionary experiment, Rowan said one evening, watching her review applications for the new steward position. All women, all qualified, all terrifying to the old guard. Is that a complaint? No, it's an observation and maybe a compliment. He smiled, a real smile, the first she'd seen from him in months. Catherine would love this, you know. She always hated how rigid everything was, how locked into tradition. Then we're building the world she wanted to live in. We are. And it's remarkable. They'd grown closer over the months since the trial. Not romantic yet, both too damaged, too cautious, but something like friendship, partnership, a foundation that might someday support more. Rowan had stopped drinking himself to sleep, started sleeping in his actual bedroom instead of passing out in the study. He smiled occasionally, laughed even, though it still sounded rusty from disuse, and he talked about Catherine now without the crushing weight of guilt. Remembered her as a person, not a failure. Honored her memory by living the way she would have wanted. One afternoon, he took Elara to the cliffs, not the spot where Catherine had died. They avoided that place by unspoken agreement, but a point further south, where the view was stunning and the drop less deadly. "I want to build something here," he said, gesturing at the empty space. "A memorial garden. For Catherine, yes, but also for anyone who's been silenced or lost to violence. A place for remembrance and reflection." Elara looked at the wild grass and the sea beyond. "That's beautiful. I want your input on the design. You understood her in ways I never did. You'll know what she'd want." They spent hours discussing it, a winding path through native flowers, benches where people could sit and think, a stone marker with Catherine's words from her journal engraved on it. "I tried. I fought. I hope someone finishes what I started." "She did start something," Elara said quietly, "and we're finishing it. Not just us. Everyone who's speaking up now demanding change. She's the reason they have the courage." "She'd hate being a martyr. Good thing we're not making her one. We're making her a catalyst." Rowan looked at her, something shifting in his expression. "When did you become so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just stubborn and angry and tired of women dying because men decided their lives didn't matter." "Well, your stubborn anger is changing the world." "Good." They stood together on the cliffs, looking out at the sea that had taken one duchess and failed to take another, and Elara felt something settle inside her. Purpose. Direction. The sense that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she fled to London, desperate and afraid. It was better. Spring came early that year, turning the gardens wild with color. Elara spent her mornings in the school, teaching girls their letters and numbers. She spent her afternoons in meetings with the Women's Association, planning initiatives and support structures. And she spent her evenings with Rowan, talking about everything and nothing, slowly learning how to be two people instead of two strangers playing roles. On a Tuesday in April, exactly 1 year after her arrival at Asheford Manor, Rowan found her in Catherine's library. "I have something for you," he said, holding out a small box. Elara opened it carefully. Inside was a ring, not the plain gold band from their hurried wedding, but something exquisite, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds set in silver that caught the light. "It was my mother's," Rowan said quietly. "She gave it to Catherine on our wedding day. After Catherine died, I couldn't bear to look at it. But now—" He paused. "I think she'd want you to have it. Both of them would." Elara's throat tightened. "Rowan, I know our marriage started as a transaction, protection for you, an heir for me. But it's become something else, something I didn't expect." He took her hand gently. "You're not just the Duchess. You're my partner, my friend, the person who saved me from drowning in guilt and grief. And I want you to know that you're valued, not for what you can give me, but for who you are." Tears blurred her vision. "I never expected this either, any of it. I came here to survive, but I found a purpose, a home, a person who sees me as more than property or obligation." "Then wear the ring, not as a replacement for what we started with, but as a symbol of what we've built." Elara slipped it on. It fit perfectly. They stood in the library, surrounded by Catherine's books and legacy, and something unspoken passed between them. Not love yet. That would come later, slowly, carefully, earned through trust and time. But the possibility of it. The foundation. That night, Elara stood at her window looking out at the cliffs where Catherine had died. The memorial garden was half finished, already beautiful even in construction. Tomorrow they'd plant the first flowers. Next week, they'd install the benches. By summer, it would be complete, a testament to one woman's courage and the change it had sparked. Behind her, the manor was finally warm. Fires in every room, lights in every window, voices echoing through halls that had been silent for too long. A home instead of a tomb. Elara pressed her hand against the cool glass and made a promise to the woman she'd never met but felt she knew completely. I'll keep fighting. I'll keep changing things. I'll make sure your death meant something, and I'll build the world you deserve to live in. The sea whispered back, carrying Catherine's voice on the wind. Or maybe that was just Elara's imagination. Either way, it felt like approval, like peace, like the beginning of something that would outlast them both. 2 years later, on a bright morning in June, Elara gave birth to a daughter. The labor was hard, 16 hours of pain and fear and the creeping terror that something would go wrong. But when the midwife finally placed the tiny, screaming bundle in her arms, all of that vanished. She had a daughter, healthy, furious, absolutely perfect. Rowan stood by the bed, tears streaming down his face, staring at the baby like she'd descended from the heavens. She's beautiful, he whispered. She's perfect. She's ours, Elara corrected, marveling at the tiny fingers wrapped around her thumb. What should we name her? Rowan didn't hesitate. Catherine, if that's acceptable to you. Elara looked down at the baby, Catherine's namesake, the heir they'd fought so hard to protect, the proof that some battles could be won. Catherine Eleanor Asheford, she said, for the woman who started this, and the life we built in her memory. The baby yawned, unimpressed by the weight of legacies she'd just inherited. Elara laughed, exhausted and exhilarated and more complete than she'd ever felt. This tiny person represented everything Thomas and Merrick had tried to prevent. An heir, a future, a continuation of the Asheford line that would be raised with completely different values than the generations before. Catherine Eleanor wouldn't grow up believing women were property. She'd grow up watching her mother run an estate, found schools, challenge systems. She'd see her father treat her mother as an equal partner, not a subordinate. She'd learn that speaking up was courage, not hysteria. That fighting for justice was noble, not inappropriate. That women's lives mattered just as much as men's. All the lessons the first Catherine had tried to teach but died before she could finish. The news spread through the village like wildfire. Within hours, people were gathering at the manor gates with gifts and congratulations. The Women's Association sent a delegation bearing a quilt they'd made together, every square embroidered with messages of hope and strength. Mrs. Brennan presented it personally, tears streaming down her weathered face. She'll need this, the older woman said, running her fingers over the stitching, to remember that she comes from courage, that she's surrounded by women who will fight for her the way we couldn't fight for Catherine. Thank you, Elara whispered, overwhelmed. No, thank you. For showing us it was possible, for proving that speaking up could actually change things. Mrs. Brennan smiled. My granddaughter is in your school now, learning mathematics and science and rhetoric. She's 12 years old and she already knows more than I learned in my entire life. That's because of you, because of Catherine, because you both refused to accept that this was how things had to be. After she left, Elara sat in the nursery watching baby Catherine sleep, the quilt draped over the crib like a blessing. Through the window, she could see the memorial garden in full bloom, purple irises and white roses and yellow daffodils creating a tapestry of color against the green grass. Women from the village often visited, sitting on the benches, reading Catherine's words on the memorial stone. I tried. I fought. I hope someone finishes what I started. Elara had finished it, not perfectly, not completely. There was still so much work to do, so many systems to change, so many women still suffering in silence. But the door was open now, and more people were walking through it every day. Rowan entered the nursery quietly, settling into the chair beside her. How are you feeling? He asked. Tired, sore, deliriously happy. He smiled, reaching for her hand. Good. You deserve to be happy. So do you. I am. For the first time in years, I actually am. He looked at their daughter. She's going to change everything, isn't she? She already has, just by existing, just by proving they failed. They sat together in the nursery, holding hands, watching their daughter sleep, and Elara felt the weight of the past 2 years settle into something she could finally release. She'd come to Asheford Manor desperate and afraid, expecting nothing but survival. Instead, she'd found justice, purpose, partnership. She'd found a way to turn tragedy into transformation. She'd found a home, Not the kind of home that traps you, but the kind that sets you free, that gives you roots strong enough to support flight, that teaches you the difference between safety and stagnation. Catherine's ghost no longer haunted these halls. She'd been laid to rest properly, her truth told, her fight finished. And in her place was something new, something living and breathing and full of possibility. A future where women weren't victims waiting to be saved, but warriors fighting their own battles. A future where speaking up was expected, not punished. A future worth building. Elara looked at Rowan, then at their daughter, then out the window at the garden blooming wild and free. And she smiled. Because once upon a time, a desperate woman had made a dangerous choice. She'd married a stranger to escape a trap. And somehow, impossibly, she'd found everything she'd never known she needed. Justice for the dead. Purpose for the living. And a love that had been earned, not given. Built stone by stone from respect and trust and shared battles. The cliff still stood at the edge of the estate, dark and jagged against the sky. But they didn't whisper of death anymore. They spoke of endurance, of survival, of women who refused to be broken, who fought back against systems designed to destroy them, who changed the world simply by refusing to disappear quietly. Catherine had started it, Elara had finished it, and Catherine Eleanor would carry it forward. 3 generations of women, connected by courage and stubbornness, and the absolute refusal to accept that this was how things had to be. The future was uncertain, still dangerous, still full of battles yet to fight, but for the first time, Elara believed they could win them, because they weren't fighting alone anymore. And that made all the difference. Baby Catherine stirred in her sleep, tiny hand reaching toward the light streaming through the window. Elara reached back, finger touching palm, making a promise. You'll grow up free. You'll grow up strong. You'll grow up knowing your voice matters, and your life has value, and no one has the right to silence you. I'll make sure of it. We all will. Outside, the sea crashed against the cliffs. Inside, the manor was finally full of life. And in that perfect, fragile moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The end. But also, somehow, just the beginning.